Hello and welcome back to another episode of James Bond What Ifs. This one, perhaps with something a bit more concrete than the usual What If. And that revolves around the long discussed, long rumored to exist original abandoned License to Kill theme that was recorded and composed by Michael Kamen with original series guitarist Vic Flick and also most famously Eric Clapton. Kamen and Clapton had been collaborating for quite some time by this point, most famously on the first two scores for the Lethal Weapon films. And the idea of bringing Clapton in while Kamen was going to be working on License to Kill seemed like an absolute perfect continuation of that sort of synergy they had on the Lethal Weapon scores. And much has been discussed or sort of thought about within the Bond fan community about the session that produced this theme. And not a whole terrible lot was really known until a number of years ago when John Burlingame wrote his Music of James Bond book. He talks about the session and got some interviews from Vic Flick and others that really gave us some more details about what was produced. Now, going off of the information that Burlingame collected, it seems pretty much obvious that they essentially produced something that would be more like a working demo and never a fully fleshed out finished theme that would have then been rejected. Now, Burlingame goes on to describe the session as originally being for perhaps a television commercial, and then Vic Flick and others came in along with Clapton and Kamen, and Kamen had already developed a sort of theme melody that they were sort of working around. And so that's really all we had to go off of after this point, was the fact that, oh, well, it probably just didn't work out, and there might be some demo floating around somewhere, and it would sort of be a work in progress. Well, cut to just a short while ago when it was discovered on a Eric Clapton fan's SoundCloud page, a fan who regularly uploads various, random bits that he finds or things that just have never seen the light of day or gotten an official release. Well, apparently he had been given an old copy of a session tape from someone who worked at a studio, and on there just happened to be this particular recording. So he uploaded it, and it was discovered by a Bond fan who then posted about it, and it started making the rounds until it hit the MI6 HQ fan page, where that's how I first noticed it. There's a pretty good forum discussion on the MI6 forums as well. But once it started making the rounds and a couple other Bond fans made some YouTube uploads, everybody started discussing, okay, is this the real thing? Has it been faked? And the consensus seemed to be split. It's very hard to describe whether it's real or fake, and nothing has been officially stated as of yet to prove its authenticity. So most fans are still kind of split on it, who have actually heard the track or know about it. But the situation got even more convoluted when all of a sudden the YouTube uploads were pulled due to a copyright claim, and that was tracked to eventually be, apparently it was pulled by the Michael Kamen estate, which is a great indicator that perhaps this is the real thing, since the Kamen estate actually issued a copyright claim and it's been pulled off of YouTube. It's also been pulled off of SoundCloud, but it has been uploaded to the Internet Archive, and I'm sure it's probably made the rounds at a few other places. So if you really want to hear it, it is probably still floating around a couple places. Again, it's not been officially proven that it's a real thing, but the fact that the Kamen estate has issued a copyright strike and has got it pulled off of YouTube in several different uploads, it definitely is the biggest indicator that this is probably the real thing. So that's how the situation stood for quite some time. And then more fans kept digging around, and of course, being Bond fans, we keep discussing things to death. So other Bond fans reached out, and some of the James Bond music groups trying to get a hold of Vic Flick to see if he could identify this track as being what they worked on during that recording session. Eventually, he was able to get back to some people, and it was relayed back to the Facebook group. Vic Flick says that he doesn't seem to recall that's what it sounded like, but that it was quite some time ago, and that it could possibly be the real thing, but it didn't seem like it to him, at least what he heard from the original SoundCloud upload. So that was another layer of the discussion. Then another Bond fan did even more detective work on top of that and made a video about his findings, which I will link to in the description below. Now, he was able to talk to the original uploader on that SoundCloud account, who gave him the story about, this was a copy tape given to him by somebody who actually worked at the studio, and this was apparently some time ago, and it was a pretty, decent generation a copy. And of course, the version he originally uploaded to SoundCloud that this then made the rounds was a heavily compressed MP3 file of that original tape. Now, he said that he uploaded it in the first place because he knew it was going to be bootlegged by another company, and so he wanted to get the material out there so people would not be, forced to purchase a unauthorized bootleg. And of course, this material has never been released, so that was his whole impetus for uploading it in the first place. And so the lineage is now there of how this came to be, and it does seem to fit. I'll go into some more technical analysis when I talk about the track itself in a minute. But the same Bond fan was also able to talk to Andrew Glenn, who was the music supervisor on License to Kill on Twitter. And there's a pretty good little back and forth on a Twitter thread, which I'll also link to. And Glenn is sort of also saying that this is probably from that session. It sort of jibes with what he remembers. So I think the indicators are there that this is quite possibly this recording we've all read about and thought about for years and years and years. And definitely it would prove that it didn't make it past the sort of working demo stage, because it is definitely rough in places and it is just an instrumental, but it does have the sort of bones of what could have developed into a full instrumental theme for License to Kill. I do want to read a brief quote or two from Burlingame's book in this particular passage, because I think that gives you the best idea of how this session was. So some people said that that the session itself was a disaster, and that Kamen was sort of, winging it as he went along. Vic Flick is quoted that, it was a kind of bluesy, bendy tune with Clapton fooling around from the outline of the theme on top of a basic backing track, and then with me providing the dark guitar counter theme and the bass end. Some describe the final recording as, quote, terrible, and that essentially it was kind of just thrown out without much consideration once it made it to Cubby Broccoli and others. Kamen was further quoted, "I was very displeased to find that my tune and my melodies were not taken seriously. I was sorry not to be able to write a Bond song. I thought I had written a really good one." So I think that gives you a good idea in a sense of this session really didn't result in a finished theme that could have just been, put in the opening titles or used at the end titles or somewhere in the film. Essentially, what this session would have produced is something very much like this instrumental that's turned up. Something with some ideas, with some Clapton flourishes and some Michael Kamen flourishes that sounds like the both of them, and also has some sounds of what Kamen was doing with the Bond theme on License to Kill, the score itself, but that it was not finished. It was sort of a work in progress and essentially is a demo. So everybody thinking about, this lost theme for years, it doesn't really hold true to what would have happened. And again, that all comes from John Burlingame's book. So that all seems to fit with what has turned up, and the biggest indication that it is perhaps real is not just the sort of Clapton touches and the Kamen touches musically, but the fact that it has been pulled via the actual copyright strike from the Michael Kamen estate. Apparently, I guess it's his heirs in charge of it. But it all seems to line up. And also, if you look at the MP3 itself, it does seem to have its dynamic range intact, which would indicate that it is obviously not a later recording from the 90s and beyond, because usually the first thing to go in a recording from, and again, the 90s and beyond, the first thing to go is the dynamic range. That just gets cut out immediately because things started to be mastered louder by the mid-90s and has only continued to this day. So that was a sort of technical indication, I think, that this was perhaps another sign that this could be the real thing. And again, none of this is proven, so we're all just guessing and debating about stuff back and forth. But there's a lot of indicators that seem to show this could possibly be the sort of working demo that resulted from that session. Now, to talk about the actual theme piece itself, essentially you have a instrumental piece that sort of starts and ends with a synth-driven version of the James Bond theme, and then the main body of the track is, it's pretty much just guitar soloing with light background accompaniment. It's very moody, and in terms of some of the melodies and the structure and the feel of it, it feels very much like what both Clapton and Kamen were doing. And I think there's even a moment or two that do suggest some of the scoring from what they just completed on Lethal Weapon 2, which also was released in 1989. So there is definitely a Lethal Weapon vibe going on. And there's also a little bit of Kamen's orchestration of the James Bond theme that you hear throughout the License to Kill score. There's a little bit of that in this piece as well, in terms of the James Bond theme sections at the beginning and the end, that do suggest Kamen's composition. So even musically, there are indicators that both of them were involved. So it definitely sounds like perhaps what they would have cooked up as a demo at this session in 88, 89. So even musically, it seems to fit. Now, some people have countered that by saying that it could have been a really dedicated fan of Kamen or Clapton or Bond or all three who pieced this together and tried to just pass it off as the real thing. How this was recorded, nobody knows, but the counter argument is there. So again, none of this is proven. I think it definitely fits all the information that we have about this one particular session. And now this is sort of being confirmed by the actual music supervisor of the film. So things are sort of falling into place. And I think if you actually get the chance to listen to it, I think you can recognize the License to Kill vibes are definitely there. Now, in terms of how it's structured, again, the opening and closing are Bond theme usages, and really, they're not necessary. They do very much stick out compared to the main piece. The majority of the track with the lead guitar. But again, this would have been a sort of a working demo in terms of the composition. And it's interesting to look at this as if it were the theme, if it was confirmed as a theme, and sort of this being the working version of a melody Kamen was fiddling around with that would have developed into, say, an instrumental theme for the opening titles, or even a theme song. The foundation is there, the feel is there. It definitely matches the tone and the darker story of License to Kill and the more burning performance of Dalton in the film. You can get the sense that this would have worked, and I think if this is confirmed to be the real track, that I think had they been given some support and maybe had another session or two, it definitely could have been turned into either a title song or a full instrumental piece or something for the end titles perhaps. So it really does seem like this could be the real thing. Again, I can't say either way because there is no 100% definite proof. It hasn't been fully confirmed yet. But if this were an elaborate hoax, it would be pretty darn elaborate. But nonetheless, it's a really nice piece to check out, and it's rare these days that we have anything from the classic original films, especially anything from before the Brosnan era, that turns up that is previously unknown or never released or discovered. It's not like you have stuff turning up from the first 16 films all the time that's never been seen before. It doesn't really happen. So it's very exciting, the prospect itself. but it remains to be seen if this will be fully confirmed. And I did make a prior video that I was going to upload about this back when it first happened, but then more things kept being discovered, and the discussion raged on. So I was going to originally make some corrections to that first video, but then I decided I should probably just re-record it and try and incorporate all this other information and the various interviews that have happened. So it's just a fascinating topic, and I'm glad that the theme itself is still floating around in various places, because I was able to hear it on SoundCloud twice, and then it just disappeared the next day before I could even talk to anybody about it. And then thankfully, some people on the Bond forums had already started talking about it, so I was able to start in that discussion and go back and forth. So again, the consensus is still kind of split, but the indicators are starting to stack up that maybe perhaps this is indeed the real thing, and we can finally hear a version of that sort of working demo of the Eric Clapton, Vic Flick, Michael Kamen abandoned License to Kill theme. If this is indeed the real thing, it would be amazing to get it fully licensed, no pun intended, on a fully remastered and expanded version of the License to Kill film score, which is a soundtrack that I know I personally, and I know a lot of other Bond fans, have really hoped would get a reissue, particularly from La La Land Records, who supposedly has been trying to get another expanded complete Bond score off the ground after their fantastic releases of the complete David Arnold scores for The World Is Not Enough and Die Another Day. They do have a good relationship with Eon. There have been rumors that they might get to do another Bond score, and then it becomes a matter of, well, which one would they tackle? And it's, of course, going to be much easier to do one of the more modern scores where the tape should be hopefully in better condition. And of those, License to Kill is the one in greatest need of a expanded release, because the original soundtrack, which I have the vinyl release behind me here, I've also got the original CD, they both share the same wonderful mastering by the legendary engineer Bernie Grundman. It is one of the best sounding of all Bond score releases, whether you have the original CD, which is pretty common, or the very obscure US vinyl release, which is very hard to find. It's actually the hardest to find of all the original Bond scores if you're trying to get original pressings, and it was never reissued on vinyl either. Regardless of which release you have, though, License to Kill, the soundtrack, is one of the most infuriatingly sequenced and badly put together soundtrack releases I have ever come across. It combines a lot of Kamen's cues into longer tracks. In fact, the last track, License Revoked, is about 10 minutes of cues cut together from all over the film, including 2 or 3 of the biggest action cues of the film are slapped together in one track by itself. It also gives you the title song, gives you the end title song, but then it also gives you all of the source music. So a majority of the album is not even Kamen's score, which is relegated to pretty much a secondary position. It also does not include any of the extras found on the pretty rare and hard to find expanded maxi singles of the end title song, for example, which I have behind me here, the promo 12-inch for If You Ask Me To, which has a couple different mixes and an instrumental version of the song. None of those are on the soundtrack release, of course, and the CD was made at the same time. Again, they both sound great. The mastering on both releases is absolutely fantastic, but the sequencing of the soundtrack is appalling. So it has been overdue for a reissue ever since this original release. If you're a soundtrack fan and you're used to how screwy some soundtrack releases could be back in the day in terms of sequencing and not having a lot of the film score, the License to Kill release is an extra just dimension of frustration. Again, it is one of the most appallingly put together and sequenced soundtrack releases I have ever seen or heard or come across. And so if La La Land is going to ever do another Bond score reissue, and if they decide to do one of the more modern scores, which should be easier to restore and put together, License to Kill is probably the best place to start, because it is in dire need of an expanded reissue. And Kamen's score is one of the most underrated Bond scores. It's my favorite score of his. I think it is really undervalued, and it really serves the film extremely well. So getting a expanded, complete release of Michael Kamen's score for License to Kill with the abandoned Kamen, Clapton, Vic Flick theme would be just the cherry on top of a beautiful, long awaited Dream soundtrack release. Again, if this is proven to be the real thing and the rights issues can be worked out between the various personnel and with Eon, it could be included as the final bonus track of a complete License to Kill release, which again would be a great dream release for Bond soundtrack aficionados. So that's a positive note to close this video out with, that maybe we could eventually get the abandoned theme included with a complete restored version of the License to Kill score. So if you've managed to hear the theme, or you have any other comments or questions about this whole interesting issue of the abandoned theme possibly popping up back again, please leave your comments below. I'm always happy to hear from other fellow Bond fans. So thanks ever so much for watching, and always keep bonding.